and that manifests in various ways. And I think that Anna's situation fits that pattern, which is why I brought it up. But it's not meant to be a diagnosis. It's meant to be a description through a different lens of a different kind of phenomenon that's nonetheless important. We can't reduce people to diagnoses entirely.
And you indicated that the way that's exhibited for Anna is if mommy turns away or leaves, I'm on my own.
That's one. Yes, I spontaneously came up with that example, but the idea of kind of like out of sight, out of mind. The person doesn't have the capacity to maintain the idea that attachment's there and exists and is strong and is helpful and loving if I can't see the person.
Okay, so this is your description of insecure attachment. Is that generally recognized in the psychiatric community, or is this?
This is not an idiosyncratic thing. It's something that we learn and we observe. I think it's much more common in the world of child psychiatry because that's where in a way it comes from childhood, and it's manifest very directly in many kids. In the world of adult psychiatry, there are many people, or you'll commonly hear descriptions of abandonment fear or anticipation of abandonment, or people who have unstable interpersonal relationships because, or they'll say abandonment sensitivity. Sometimes people who have personality disorders, such as what's called borderline personality disorder, have problems in that area. So that's where you'll commonly hear it talked about in adult psychiatry, or in the area of depression, people who are like very rejection sensitive. That's the kind of way you'll hear it discussed commonly.
Okay. Now you also, I would ask you, call your attention to exhibit number 6, defendant's exhibit number 6.
Thank you.
And as you previously testified, that's the FDA black box warning on Zoloft.
Yes.
And that's FDA's Food and Drug Administration for the United States?
Correct.
And these warnings are out there because they've conducted research, or they've reviewed research, and they've determined this is necessary to be on the medication to warn people of a possible severe or serious side effect, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this specific warning from the Food and Drug Administration to warn people of side effects mentions suicidality, correct?
Correct.
Doesn't mention causes anybody to be homicidal, does it?
That's correct.
And there's a difference between suicide and homicide, isn't there?
Yes, we discussed that before.
Yes. So are you saying that despite the fact that, in your opinion, Zoloft could cause homicide, the Food and Drug Administration, who's charged with protecting people and warning them about side effects of drugs, don't mention that in a black box warning that they put on the medication?
Well, I think this is an area of sensitivity and controversy. This is an area in which there's imperfect and limited information out there. There is not, there has been research done, and the research has indicated there's cause for concern, but it hasn't, as far as I know, been able to, definitively prove or disprove an association with suicidality. But there is also research on the issue of homicidality, and so you could find some papers out there, some case studies and some review papers that raise similar concerns about Zoloft and homicidality. And so, for whatever reason, I don't understand the politics of the FDA, and I'm not sure the timeline in terms of when those studies came into being and when the black box was made. The black box is as it is. I think I think suicide being such a common concern amongst people who are getting treated with antidepressants also explains why there's a need to educate prescribers and patients and their families about this.
Well, wouldn't it be reasonable to believe that homicide would also be a concern if a medication could have that effect on people to make them homicidal?
Of course, but for whatever reason, the evidence isn't as strong for that as it was for suicide. And so I don't, again, understand the inner workings of the FDA and what went into the decision on this, but I know that there are some reports and there are people who have concerns about the issue with respect to homicidality as well as suicidality.
Okay, but up till now, the people that are charged with protecting our food and drugs aren't showing a concern or a significant concern to where they make a black box warning about it, true?
That's correct.
And as far as the effect that Zoloft may have had on Anna, she is sitting in the room with us today, so fair to say she didn't commit suicide, right?
We can all see that.
And you understand or you know that she committed the offense 2 days before she was arrested for the offense, right?
Yes.
So that would have given her opportunity, if she was suicidal, to follow through with that, correct?
I'm not sure, yes, but I'm not sure what you're driving at.
Well, if the warning on Zoloft is that it causes suicidality in some people, and Anna is sitting here before us, and she had a couple of days after she killed her mother to kill herself and didn't do it, wouldn't it be fair to say that Zoloft isn't affecting her to make her suicidal?
Well, having suicidality doesn't necessarily mean that you would complete a suicide. So you can have, suicidality is it's an idea, it's an act, it's an intention. It's all those things before it gets to you've killed yourself. And so Anna, I think I think there's good evidence that Anna was having increased suicidality in the 1 month prior to the killing, and that's of concern. What happened afterwards the fact that she didn't kill herself 1 or 2 days afterward doesn't mean that that she wasn't suicidal before. And it doesn't erase the possibility of Zoloft possibly having had some impact.
So in your 4-hour interview with her in preparation of your report, she discussed the shooting and things that happened after that, correct?
Yes, she did.
She mentioned being suicidal to you?
No, not at that point.
You indicated, though, that during the course of that interview with Anna, that when she discussed the shooting, she told you things along the lines of, if I pull the trigger, I'll lose her, meaning her mother, correct?
Correct.
if I tell her, she'll get mad, I'll lose her. She won't let me stay here. She'll throw me out, things of that nature, right?
Yes,
And that was what she told you was going through her head when she pulled the trigger and killed her mother. Is that correct?
just before, yes.
Okay. So it wasn't, if I don't pull the trigger, I'll lose Rachel, right? It wasn't, if I don't do this, I'll lose Rachel, right? Her concern was losing Mom, not losing Rachel, right?
No, I don't agree with that.
Did she tell you that her concern was losing Rachel, or did she tell you her concern was losing her mom?
Objection to the phrasing of the question. It gives them two alternatives and no others, therefore argument.
Overruled. You may answer, sir.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Did she tell you that she was afraid of losing Rachel, or that she was afraid of losing her mom?
Okay, at that moment, in that one phrase, she is, as we already established, saying she's afraid of losing, she doesn't want to lose her mom. But earlier, in other parts of our conversation, she was very afraid of losing Rachel. This was the impossible bind that she found herself in. I think ideally she would want both Rachel and Mom in her life, but she found, somehow got herself into a place where she thought she needed to have Rachel in her life, and the only way she could do that was if her mom wasn't alive. So they coexist, but at different points in time.
Were you aware that in text messaging between Rachel and Anna prior to this, the end of the month of June, it was Anna that came up with the idea of killing her mother?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Were you aware of text messaging that occurred between Rachel and Anna at the end of June, before this incident, that it was Anna that first came up with the idea of killing her mother?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And that doesn't change your opinion?
I think, I think maybe you're referring to the, I'm not sure exactly which text you're referring to, but that doesn't change my opinion. I think that it was very much a kind of, at the stage of ideation, it was very much a collaboration between her and Rachel. I think it was something that went back and forth. There are other text messages where Rachel is saying, to go ahead and, can you kill her? And other things even more strong and direct than that I believe this court has heard previously. But I think that it was like many examples of adolescents who are involved in crimes. It's something that they share intensely with their peers. In this case, one peer, Rachel. So it's the shared dimension of it, which earlier I said was really important. I have a hard time seeing, even if Rachel, might have had that idea first, I have a hard time seeing her progressing down that pathway of communication and action, which leads people to commit acts of violence. I have a hard time seeing her going down that pathway by herself. And this really fits the pattern, again, of adolescent crime.
But right before she pulled the trigger, she was afraid of losing her mother, not Rachel.
Absolutely.
Now, you also testified that you believe these events are unlikely to recur. You remember that testimony
Yes.
earlier? And that Anna doesn't have an adolescent brain anymore. You testified to that?
Yes.
And you didn't do any follow-up interview with her, so how are you making that assessment sitting there, that Anna doesn't have an adolescent brain anymore?
Based on her age.
Based solely on age?
Yes.
Okay. So these events unlikely to recur based solely on her age or based on what?
No, I said, I think I identified a number of different factors. I said that based on her age, we could expect that her prefrontal cortex has the capacity to balance out her limbic system, which is the key issue for adolescents, is that drives their increased risk behavior. But I also said that there were other factors that I thought were indicated that Anna has more resources and more protection. One, she has the strong support of her father and stepmother who meet with her and talk with her very, very frequently. Also, she has completed a high school degree. Also, she hasn't been a behavior problem in prison. She appears to get along with people. So all of those things I cited as indirect evidence. That's what I have available to me. But indirect evidence that suggests that she isn't a risk. And of course that the circumstances, that impossible bind that she found herself in is highly, highly unlikely to repeat itself.
So you're making this off of your opinion based off of indirect evidence, not direct evidence from actually communicating with Anna and seeing where she's at today in an interview.
Well, I didn't have the opportunity to interview her again. I'm basing, it is my opinion, yes, and I'm basing it on evidence and facts that I have available to me, and it's up to you and Your Honor to interpret that however they want. But I think that I'm bringing to it the lens of a person who thinks, as a mental health professional, as an expert in threat assessment, and trying to understand what are the factors that are present, what are the factors that are absent, and what do they all add up to, and that's the basis for my opinion.
Okay. And again, your experience with threat assessment is generally involving terrorism, acts of mass casualty, that type of thing, correct?
Not strictly, but I'm known for that, as we've said, but there are other kinds of circumstances that are more ordinary, where I think about those things.
Okay. And how much were you paid for your consulting fee for this case, Doctor?
I was paid my standard rates, which is $500 an hour for testimony like this, and $400 an hour for other kinds of work, like record review or writing.
Okay, well, how much were you paid so far in this case?
Oh, I don't have the total in mind, I'm sorry. It's been a long time. This case has been going on for years. But I could just tell you what I did.
It's all right. If you don't know the answer, that's fine.
I don't recall. I'm sorry. This has been going on for 3 or 4 years.
Okay, I have no other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Marius.
Thank you, Anna. Doctor, my opposing counsel began with questioning you about the IQ and working memory and processing speed assessments. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And they were conducted some time ago, true?
Yes.
How would you characterize IQ, working memory, and processing speed in terms of whether that can evolve and change over years?
It's possible that there could be some evolution, depending on the circumstances of the person and treatment and things like that. But generally, those characteristics are more hardware than software. They're really key kind of core dimensions of the brain's functioning, and they're not going to change with the wind. So, meaning that if a person is on a certain trajectory, if they have profound weaknesses there, they're not going to just one day wake up and everything's going to be normal.
The government asked you about whether doctors rely in part upon the examination subject's reports with respect to that subject's thought process. You recall his line of questioning regarding that?
You know, can you repeat that, because I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Sure. The government asked you about whether doctors such as yourself rely in part upon the reports that they receive
Yes,
from the subjects they're examining, correct?
yes,
And you might recall him saying that there are some people, asking you about whether there are some people who are adept at deceiving the examiner. You recall that?
yes,
Parenthetically, a doctor treating a patient for a heart attack relies in part upon the patient's report of chest pain, correct?
correct.
Is it an appropriate factor for the court, or for the examiner to consider a patient's or examination subject's report as part of the overall evaluation of that subject?
It's necessary, and we all do it in all areas of healthcare. You know, there's people who, for example, you know, there's people who may be having crushing chest pain but will not tell the person. And there's other people who will exaggerate or make something up. And so we all of us doctors and healthcare professionals depend upon that and our ability to assess that.
Now, my opponent asked you whether there are those kinds of people who are good at deceiving the examiner. You recall that?
Yes,
In your evaluation of Anna Schroeder, with her IQ, her memory, her processing speed, and all of the other components of her psyche, is she one of those kinds of people?
not in my opinion. I thought Anna was being pretty straightforward with me. I think she was fearful, a little anxious, a little nervous at first, but part of the reason I spent that many hours with her was to kind of give her a chance to settle in and relax, and I felt that that she was not deceiving me or not exaggerating.
Now, my opponent also asked you questions about what you rely upon when reviewing the records of other practitioners. When reviewing the records of earlier practitioners in your examination of a case such as this, do you just read the earlier record, accept it totally and without any question, and rely exclusively upon it?
No, of course not.
In fact, what do you evaluate when looking at the records? What role do they play in your overall evaluation of a case such as this?
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand what conclusions they came to, and I'm also trying to understand what was the basis and evidence for them to come to those conclusions, because there are a lot of instances where somebody will come to a conclusion on thin or non-existent evidence, and so I'm trying to look at it from both points of view. And then also, when you have somebody who's unfortunately crossed so many different healthcare systems and so many different providers, I'm looking for some kind of continuity of phenomenon and insights. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, and unfortunately, my conclusion again, with respect to Anna, was that she got substandard treatment because there was not enough frequent enough expert involvement to try to understand, to properly assess her, and to try to manage her case.
Anna did not commit suicide. She's sitting right there and she's alive. Does that mean she was never suicidal?
Of course not.
Describe the nexus between suicidality and homicidality as it manifested itself in the mind of Anna Schroeder.
Well, I think Anna, for many years, was having suicidal thoughts. Again, I distinguish those from the self-mutilation issue, which we described earlier, but she had had prior episodes of suicide attempts, and it was something that her family was aware of. So that's been there for some time. I'm not aware that any kind of homicidal ideations were there for some time, but that kind of came onto the scene, in the month or two preceding the killing. And so I guess I see it as, Anna was getting into a more and more desperate space in May and June. Self-mutilation wasn't working. She made, a frank suicide attempt, ended up in the emergency room. She didn't know how she's going to be able to see Rachel. She wanted to be with Rachel. They got themselves into a place where the only solution seemed to be a solution that involved killing. That's a very, very sad and desperate, tragic place to be in, but it's one that people get themselves into. And so I think that it's, of course, not an answer to be thinking about homicidality, but in a way it was for them. They thought in some twisted kind of way that this is going to solve their problems. I think that I think it was in part driven by the suicidality and the despair and the fear of abandonment that Anna felt, but it was also driven by the idea that maybe Anna had at first, but that Anna and Rachel ran with together, that homicide was the answer here. It was going to solve their problems.
No further questions.
Mr. Costello?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. You may step down. Please replace your mask before you leave the stand.
Your Honor, the defense does not intend to
The
recall.
documents that you have, I need those back. Thank you. Ones that are marked as exhibits.
This one's yours.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Your Honor, the
Meredith.
defense does not intend to recall Dr. Wine, and I intend to ask him to leave. He's not under subpoena, but I wanted to indicate that in case the state intends to recall.
Mr. Costello.
I have no objection to the doctor leaving.
All right, Dr. Wine, you are free to leave. You're also free to stay if you'd like. All right, you may call your next witness.
Ms. Busco will be calling the next witness, Your Honor.
I just didn't hear you.
Ms. Busco will be calling the next witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Buskell?
Your Honor, I called Daryl Schroeder.
All right, please approach and be sworn, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, sir, have a seat up here. Watch your step on the way up. Please speak into the microphone. If you feel comfortable, you may remove your mask. Same for you, Ms. Buskell. Oh, you've already done it. Thank you. You may begin.
Please state your name.
Daryl Schroeder.
And let's get this out of the way, Daryl. You pronounce your last name Schroeder, correct?
Yes.
Even though it's spelled with an O.
Correct.
And
I
you've
usually-
heard us throughout the proceedings refer to you as both Schroeder and Schroeder,
Yeah.
but how do you pronounce it?
Schroeder,
All right, Daryl, how old are you?
55,
And where do you live?
Tampico.
And for how long have you lived in Tampico?
6 months,
And where did you live prior to that?
Buda.
And have you lived in this area pretty much all your life?
Yes,
Are you employed?
yes.
And where are you employed?
Starbuck Machinery,
For how long have you been at Starbucks Machinery?
7 months this time.
And have you worked there for quite a while
All total of probably about 23 years.
though? What do you do there?
Lead machinist,
Are you currently married?
yes.
To whom are you married?
Michelle,
And for how long have you been married to Michelle?
a little over 3 years,
And you've been with her for a while before that, correct?
yes.
Before you were married to Michelle, is it accurate that you were married to Peggy Schroeder?
Yes,
And the two of you thereafter divorced, correct?
correct.
Let's talk about Anna. When was Anna born?
June 3rd, 2002.
And you-
July 3rd, I'm sorry.
I was gonna correct you, so is that July 3rd, 2002?
Yes,
Daryl?
July 3rd, 2002.
Now, she was born on July 3rd of 2002, but when did you first meet Anna?
March 17th of 2004.
And explain how that occurred.
2:30 in the morning, received a phone call from DCFS on possible placement of two children. Me and Peggy were licensed for foster care for 2 kids. And actually the phone call was, they had 3 kids that needed placement, so they were all family. And I had to pick which 2 of the 3 since we were only licensed for 2. So we went ahead and picked the 2 girls.
Now, when you and Peggy got the 2 girls, had you been trying to have children?
Yeah, it had been a process. Peggy had went through 2 miscarriages, and then we had went through 2 failed IVF attempts. So then we decided that we would go through foster care and hoping to be able to adopt.
And who were those 2 girls, Harold?
Kayleen and Anna.
What, if anything, do you know about Kayleen and Anna's biological parents?
But know nothing of either one of their dads, basically. Got very little information there. And I guess their mom, at the time we got them, wasn't doing a very good job of taking care of them. Our story was we were told that she left them with a babysitter for over 48 hours. And they had a son that needed a feeding tube to feed him, had a feeding tube on him. Or they had a brother, I guess I should say. And the babysitter wasn't shown how to do that, so Kayleen and her brother were the ones that were actually feeding their brother, their other brother. So, and the babysitter finally called the authorities, and since the mom hadn't showed up in over 2 days.
And since that time that Anna and Kayleen came into your care, have you had them ever since?
Yes.
Daryl, how was Anna when she was a small child?
She, basically seemed pretty happy most of the time. She was quiet a lot. I guess growing up, she had a few friends that would always come and go out of her life. Just, she could never seem to keep, the same ones would keep coming back, but they wouldn't stay as friends, at different times.
did she get along well with her sister Kayleen?
At times, when they were younger, they got along a little better, but the older they got, the more they, didn't get along as much.
Daryl, when did you first start to notice that Anna had some issues that needed professional help?
I would say when she started school, when she started in kindergarten, preschool a little bit, but more of when she was in kindergarten, that she was having issues.
And did you seek professional help for Anna?
Yes. Yep.
Now, you were here during Dr. Lyne's testimony and heard him talk about the various multiple providers that helped Anna throughout the years, correct?
Yes.
And he described that treatment as disjointed. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Explain from your perspective why there was such a disjointed medical treatment of your daughter Anna.
When we first started taking her, it was to Mississippi and Dixon. And unfortunately, it seemed like the first 3 or 4 years, their turnover of help in the psychologists and counselors and stuff was a high turnover. It seemed like every 6 months there was somebody different entering in, trying to catch up and help figure things out.
And do you recall when it was that she first started medication for those issues?
Immediately going after the first visit, they put her on medication for ADHD.
Sorry, Daryl, go ahead. You said that she started that around school age, so would that be
Yeah.
around 5 years old?
Yes.
Now, when you and Peggy got divorced, do you recall how old Anna was at the start of that process?
I recall she was in 5th grade, so she would have been 8, 9 years old.
And how did the divorce affect Anna?
Anna took that super, super hard. She ended up failing 5th grade and had to take it over. And, talking with her, she always thought she was the reason for the divorce, and she wasn't, but it was hard for her to understand, that she wasn't, so.
Daryl, after the divorce, did Anna live primarily with Peggy?
Not initially. We had a split custody initially.
And then how did it come to be that she was living with Peggy at the time of this incident?
It was unfortunately actions that her older sister had done that caused me to basically say Kayleen couldn't stay with me no more. So Anna wanted to stay with Kayleen, so she ended up doing more with Peggy than
So
me.
she actually chose to go with Kayleen to live primarily at Peggy's, correct?
Yes.
After both girls were primarily with Peggy, thereafter did Kayleen eventually move out of Peggy's home?
Yeah. Yes, when Kayleen turned 18, she was still a senior in high school, but she decided that she didn't want to go with mom's rules no more, so she moved out.
How did Kayleen moving out of the home with Peggy and Anna affect Anna?
Well, even though they may not have got along at times, I still know that Anna always wanted Kayleen around, just her physically being there, helped her, yeah, they would do things together at times, but yeah, she missed that, her just being there.
Describe Anna as she got older and started to get into her teen years.
She started to get more quiet, more stuff in her room. She would have friends over periodically or go to the friends' houses. She enjoyed dance. I'm pretty sure she did that for 6 or 7 years. Her and her sister both did that. And Anna had changed from one dance studio to another when her friends moved to the other studio to dance, so she wanted to do that too.
Daryl, did you notice that Anna, like with the example you just provided on dance, did she like to do what her friends were doing?
Yeah, I noticed she usually kind of relied on them of what games they wanted to play or what music they wanted to listen to or stuff like that. She followed a lot of what her friends were doing.
Has Anna, prior to this, Daryl, ever been arrested?
No.
Has she ever been in any trouble with the law whatsoever?
No.
How was she in school?
For the most part, her grades were pretty good, with obviously the exception of the first round of 5th grade. And actually, I was very, very surprised and happy to see when she was at Mary Davis, the longer she was there, the better she was doing with school. And she actually, because when this happened, she was going to go into high school. So she actually graduated high school a year early. So I know, especially the last year and a half of being there, she worked really hard at her schoolwork to get that done, to graduate.
During the time prior to Mary Davis and prior to the incident, did Anna have many friends that she was close with?
I wouldn't say many. I would say she probably had 3 or 4 that she was close with.
And what, if anything, did you notice about Anna's relationship with her friends?
Like I said earlier, she was always on and off with friends. And it was like certain friends she couldn't be friends with that one and this one at the same time. So it just didn't work for her. I don't know if it was them or her or, but she always had a few core friends that she would do things with.
And at some point, did she become friends with Rachel Helm?
Yes.
Did you have the opportunity to meet Rachel?
Yeah, the first time Peggy had taken them swimming in Rock Falls, and Rachel was there also. And Anna had lost her glasses while swimming, so I had to meet up with Peggy at the eye doctor so we could get new glasses ordered. So, and Rachel came along. And my understanding, that was like the first time she had met Rachel there.
And do you know how long before the incident the friendship with Rachel began?
No, I'm not positive on that, truthfully. I want to say it was probably close to a year, probably a little less than that.
At some point, did you come to understand that Rachel and your daughter were more than just friends?
And I probably realized that about 2 months prior to the incident.
And how did you become aware of that?
just the observation of how they behaved around each other. It had changed, from just a general friendship.
And did you understand that they were in more of a dating or romantic relationship?
Yes,
And was Peggy aware of that?
yes,
You and Peggy, in fact, talked about that, didn't you?
yes.
And did you guys decide together on some rules that you were going to have Anna follow as it related to Rachel?
Yeah, that we were going to make sure that they were not in, like, an example, a bedroom or another room by themselves where, nobody else was there to make sure they weren't doing inappropriate things.
And so you and Peggy, even though you were divorced, were able to come together and co-parent Anna on typical teenage things like teenage relationships, right?
Yes.
And would you say that you and Peggy were on the same page about Anna and Rachel's relationship?
I don't think I would be the same page. I think we were similar. I think I was more okay with that relationship than Peggy was.
And why is that?
I just don't think, I'm not sure.
During the time that that Anna and Rachel were together, what kind of effect did you notice Rachel had on Anna?
To me, I could clearly see that Rachel was in charge of that relationship, that, if Rachel wanted to go for a walk, they went for a walk. If she wanted to watch a movie, they watched a movie. Yeah, Anna would make suggestions and stuff like that, but it ultimately came down to whatever Rachel wanted to do at the time.
Now, Rachel was a little bit older than Anna, right?
Yeah, I guess by about 6 months.
And was she a grade above her in school because of
Yes,
Anna being held back?
yes.
Daryl, let's talk about June of 2017. At that point, Anna and Rachel were dating, right?
Yes,
And you and Peggy and your wife, Michelle, all knew about that relationship, right?
yes.
Had you, around that time, in May and June of 2017, had you seen Anna's stability start to deteriorate?
I would say her confidence in herself wasn't very good.
And what happened in June of 2017 that raised the alarm for you?
I guess the biggest thing was the incident of the suicide and ended up being at the hospital when she was at our house at the time. Both me and Michelle were at work, and received a text message and a photo from one of Anna's friends that Anna had sent a picture of what she had done to herself to them, and that got us, getting her to the hospital.
And what had Anna done to herself?
She had cut her wrist pretty deep in several spots.
And what did you do in reaction to that?
Immediately left work and met her at the hospital.
And is that when you found out that Anna had tried to kill herself?
Yeah, I had known that she had done minor cutting before, but nothing, no other, what was felt to be a suicide attempt.
Now, after this suicide attempt, Daryl, was Anna's medication was changed, correct?
Yes.
And did the rules that you and Peggy had for Anna become more strict after that?
I know they did for me, because I wanted to keep a closer eye on her, because obviously she was having more issues than I realized.
And do you know if Peggy's rules at her house changed in relation to how much contact Anna was allowed to have with Rachel?
I know Peggy didn't want Anna to have very much contact with Rachel, so I would assume, yeah, that she got more strict with that.
Let's talk about Saturday, July 8th. Now, that was supposed to be your regular visitation with Anna on that day, right?
Yes.
What happened when you went to the house to pick Anna up?
Actually, it was, we had always met at Walgreens in Rock Falls at 11 o'clock in the morning. So I went there to pick up Anna, and Peggy didn't show up, and she wasn't answering my text messages, and Anna wasn't answering text messages, so I waited around there for probably about a half hour, then went home and kept trying to get a hold of Peggy and Anna and got no answers.
When you couldn't get an answer out of Peggy, what did you do next?
I finally decided, well, I better just go to Peggy's house and talk to her and find out what's going on.
And so did you make your way to Peggy's house?
Yes.
What did you do when you got to Peggy's house?
As I walked up to Peggy's house, her neighbor to the neighbor to the west came out and commented he was smelling smoke from her house. So I tried the door, there was no answer. So then I called 911, and the lady told me to go ahead and try the back door to see if it was locked. So I did that. And so then she actually told me to break the door down, or kick the door in or whatever. So I ended up doing that, and then tried to crawl in, and I got about 3 feet in and said, nope, I'm not doing that. So, and then when I came out, there was another gentleman that came down the street that said he was part of the Erie Fire Department. So he tried to go in. And then when he came back out, by that time, then a Morrison police officer had showed up. And then within minutes after that, the fire department was there.
So when you showed up and could smell the smoke, you actually were the one who called 911, correct?
Yes.
And after the agencies arrived, the fire department and others, did you turn your attention to trying to find Anna?
Yes. Because I was able to get a hold of Kayleen right away. And then kept trying different friends of Anna's to try to figure out where she was at.
And where was Anna when you finally found her?
In Rock Falls. I don't know where exactly she was. Michelle and my brother had went to go get her. They met up with them to pick Anna up and bring her back to Morrison.
And Daryl, I understand you don't know where she was at. Do you know who she was with when you found her?
I found out later she was with Rachel.
And so after Michelle and your brother found her, you had them bring her home, right?
Yes. Brought her to Morrison.
And they brought her to your home, correct?
No, we actually brought her to the scene at Peggy's house. And then eventually we went home after that, later.
And after she met you at the scene and went home, did you have an opportunity to speak with Anna then?
Not really. I mean, we talked about some things, but not a whole lot.
How was she during that time, Daryl?
Very quiet. Crying a lot.
Did you take her to cooperate in the investigation of what had happened on that day?
Yes.
You actually took her to speak with the police, didn't you?
Yes.
And you and Anna did cooperate with the investigation, correct?
Yes.
Daryl, what did you think when you found out what Anna had done?
I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. Disbelief.
Now, since that time, Daryl, Anna's been in juvenile detention and now jail since July of 2017, right?
Yes.
Have you continued during that time to be involved in her life?
Yes. As many phone calls and visits as we can do.
And during the time that Anna was in juvenile detention at Mary Davis, how did she do?
She progressively got better, and in the beginning, she still struggled with being still very quiet, not, saying much, and eventually, after seeing a psychologist at Bridgeway and getting her medications changed, it's a huge personality change. It was unbelievable once we changed the medication and how she changed.
And you had talked earlier about that she actually, while she was there, completed her high school courses, correct?
Yes.
And she
Yep.
caught up to what would have been her graduating class.
Yes.
Did you, while she was at Mary Davis, also have the opportunity to meet with Dr. Line, who testified today?
Yes.
And did you have the opportunity to read the report that he had prepared for this case?
No, I have not read the report. I've just been told certain things in it, but I have not read it.
Did you come to understand his concern about the role that Zoloft and the medications had played with your daughter?
Yep. When I found out about that, I immediately contacted the psychologist she was seeing at Bridgeway to get that medication changed.
And as it stands today, Anna does not take Zoloft, correct?
That's correct.
Now, during the time since July of 2017, what have you done to help Anna grow up and become more mature and responsible?
I guess every time we talk to her, try to do visits, we try to keep everything positive and make sure that, she's focusing on future and not the past.
And once Anna has served her punishment and served her time, do you intend to continue to be a part of your daughter's life?
Yes, very much.
And you plan to continue to provide support like you have while she's been in jail, correct?
Yes.
What do you plan to do to make sure that when Anna is released, that she continues on this improved path that she is currently on?
Actually, one of the first things I really want to do is teach her how to drive. And then just try to make sure that, she continues in education.
And you said you and Michelle are going to continue to be part of her life, correct?
Yes.
Even though, as she sits here today, she's 19, she's an adult, will you continue to be a part of her mental health treatment?
Definitely. I definitely want to make sure she's continuing in counseling, and because I think that's something she's going to need probably for the rest of her life, to make sure she can stay on the right path, the right medications,
Now, there are a few last questions. You've had a lot of time, a lot of visits with Anna since July of 2017, right?
Yep.
Do you have an opinion, or do you have an impression from talking with your daughter on whether she has learned from the mistakes she made?
Oh, definitely. She has definitely learned from that.
How do you know that?
Just the conversations we have, you know, asking her questions and just her outlook on on things, that it's more mature. She has more realistic goals, you know.
And do you have an opinion from speaking with your daughter on whether she regrets all of this?
Yes, she definitely does that. She definitely is, you know, sorry for what she has done.
And has she expressed to you, Daryl, that she in fact misses her mom
And I've heard that many times.
and that she wishes that all of this had never happened?
Yep, that's very true. She definitely does wish it had never happened.
I could have just a moment, Your Honor. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Schroeder, direct your attention back to the weekend of July 6, 2017, that period of time. Were you and your, I think at the time, girlfriend, planning a birthday party for Anna?
We'd actually probably had a birthday party for her.
Okay, so her birthday was on
Because
July?
we had her the weekend before this happened, and we would have done that then.
Okay, so it would have been the weekend before?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were trying to contact Anna on the 8th, that was the day you were supposed to pick her up at the Walgreens in Rock Falls, right?
Yes. Yep.
She didn't respond to you at all?
No.
Did you come to find out that when you were trying to find her, that she was at the subway in Morrison?
Later. Well, I don't think that was. I don't know when I found out. You know.
I mean, she was trying to avoid you.
Yeah. Yeah. We found out that later. Yeah.
All right. And she came back to your house on the 8th, correct, of July?
Yeah. That evening.
Okay. When you took her back, because you took her back you found her in Rock Falls, you took her back over to the house on Park Street in Morrison, correct?
Yes.
And then you brought her back from Park Street, I think at the time you were living in Walnut, right?
Yes.
You brought her back to your house.
Correct.
When she was at Park Street in Morrison, after you took her back there, did she give any indication that she was involved in any way with the fire, with the death?
No, she was just constantly crying.
When you got back to your house in Walnut, did anybody come over?
She had a friend over for a little bit.
Okay, and the friend wasn't Rachel, correct?
No, it was not.
Okay, it was some other friend.
Correct.
And were they laughing and giggling and having a good time together?
I would say no. I would say it was pretty quiet.
Anything was quiet? All right. And then the police showed up at your house in Walnut, right?
Yeah, if I recall, that was like 11 o'clock at night.
Right, and then that's when things started to unravel?
Yes.
Okay, and then they asked you to take her to the police station, and you did so?
Yes.
And by her, I'm talking about Anna, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now you indicated you wanted to teach Anna how to drive. Were you aware that Peggy was trying to teach her how to drive before she was killed?
I was told that, Peggy took her once.
Right. But you didn't know that ahead of time?
No, I found that out later.
How long had Anna lived with Peggy?
Probably year and a half.
And was it on Park Street the whole time, or was it somewhere
No,
else? in
she
Park?
had an apartment elsewhere prior to that.
And then they moved to Park?
Yep.
So were you guys, sorry I used that phrase, were you and Peggy sharing custody through a court order, or is this just some arrangement you two made on your own?
It was a court order.
Okay. And was it an agreed court order, or was it after a hearing?
It was agreed.
Okay. You didn't have any qualms about Anna and Kayleen moving in with their mother, Peggy, here in Morrison?
No.
And you were aware of the work that Peggy had done at Wall Clipper? Was she working at Wall Clipper when you guys were married?
Yes.
And she was still working at Wall Clipper on the day she was killed?
Correct.
And were you aware that she was working other jobs as well?
Yes.
And was that so she would have extra money for Kayleen and Anna?
I didn't quiz her on that.
Okay, you just know she was working extra
Yeah.
jobs?
Yep.
All right. I don't have any other questions, thank you.
Ms. Buskell.
Nothing based on that, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
At this time, we are going to adjourn for about 5 minutes. I also need to check on, we're off the record. I need to check on one other prisoner that you guys had brought up, so maybe you and I can confer about that.
Sure.
In the interim, okay. All right, we'll be in recess, thank you.
remain seated, court is back in session.
All right, Mr. Murtis or Ms. Buskell, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the defense calls Michelle Schroeder.
All right, please approach and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
All right, please have a seat up here, ma'am. Watch your step on the way up. Please speak into the microphone, and if you feel comfortable, you may remove your mask. You may begin, Mr. Murtis.
Please state your name.
Michelle Schroeder.
Are you related to Daryl Schroeder?
Yes, I am.
What is your relationship?
We are married.
When were you married?
August of 2018.
At the time of this tragedy, were you involved in Daryl and Anna's life?
Very much so, yes.
When did you and Daryl begin dating?
June of 2016.
And were you residing together in July of 2017 when this tragedy occurred?
Yes, we were.
How long had you been residing together before July of 2017?
Approximately 8 months.
During that period of time, did you come to know Anna Schroeder?
Yes.
Michelle, how would you describe your relationship to Anna?
We became friends very easily, and I was falling in love with that little girl very easily, and we loved hanging together, just, spending time together when she was with us on the weekends.
Can you talk a little bit about your background? How far did you go in school?
I graduated high school, and further on in life, I decided to go to beauty school.
Are you employed?
I am.
What is your occupation?
I am a custodian at a grade school / high school, Consolidated, Bureau Valley.
Michelle, in June of 2017, we heard testimony that Anna attempted suicide and ultimately went to the emergency room. Is that correct?
Yes,
At that time, you and Daryl were residing together, is that correct?
yes,
And it's my understanding from the testimony of Daryl that suicide attempt occurred in your home.
it did, yes.
Tell me about your recollection of the events of that day.
I had just started summertime work, which meant I went to day shift, and I got a call approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, and it was Daryl, and specifically said, "Go home now, Anna hurt herself." So I left work, it was approximately half hour early, and went straight there. Took me 2 minutes to get there and pulled up behind an ambulance.
Did you speak with Anna in the emergency room?
Oh, yes.
And
I was by her side the whole time.
was Peggy there?
I actually rode in the ambulance on the way there. Yes, she was.
Now, this is important. I'd like you to describe your relationship to Peggy Schroeder.
Peggy and I were just getting to know each other in our drop-offs and pickups. I always saw a friendly wave hello from her car to ours. And then it became, we got to talk a little bit here and there, and only at those drop-offs and pickups. And, but in the hospital, I'm sorry. We got to walk off and have a little talk. And she was very happy that I was there for Anna. And we talked about the situations of her friend at the time, Rachel, and what we were going to do about the whole situation of what she did to herself that day.
Well, discuss what you and Peggy talked about with reference to your observations of the relationship that was formed between Anna and Rachel.
We both knew that it was becoming something more than just friends. Not really verified from Anna. And while we were down in the lobby, Rachel and her mom walked in. And both Peggy and I were surprised. And I looked at Rachel and said hello. And she specifically said, "Hi, Anna wants me here." But we have never, Anna never told us that. She didn't say how she talked to her, how she wanted her there.
Did you form concerns about the nature and complexion of the relationship between Anna and Rachel?
Yes.
What were those concerns?
That day, Peggy and I were discussing how, well, actually, that was when Rachel told us that they were back together, dating. And when Peggy and I walked back over to Anna's room, we discussed that the situation between the two of them as a couple, that we need to treat it as if they were a boyfriend and a girlfriend. They needed supervision while they were at our houses, her house, our house, whenever. So that was our mutual agreement with Daryl and Peggy and myself.
Michelle, the suicide attempt of Anna in June of 2017 was obviously very troubling to you, Peggy, and Daryl, correct?
Yes.
And did it also serve as the beginning of a friendship between you and Peggy?
Yes, most definitely. I think that accelerated it right then and there.
And did you and Peggy begin communicating regularly with respect to Anna?
Yes, we did. More so at the visit, or the pickups and drop-offs. That day in the hospital, Peggy stood on one side of Anna holding her hand, and I stood on the other. And telling her that we had her back. We were there for her.
When Peggy died, did you consider yourself to have lost a friend?
I did.
And did you think of Peggy as a good mom?
Yes, I did. Very much so.
Since the tragedy, have you had contact with Anna?
I got to talk on the phone with her only for the first year. And she was ecstatic when we told her that Dad and I were getting married, because that meant I could visit with her too.
And since you got married, have you been able to visit with her in person, both at Galesburg and then now Whiteside?
Yes. Every trip Daryl made to Galesburg, there might have been one that I missed. I was with him for support, but I did not get to go in and see her. But as soon as the day we got married, I began the visits with her. And I got my first hug.
How would you describe the relationship that you have with Anna today?
I would say that we are in a really good spot as far as being able to talk. There's times when Dad and I could not be together because of my work schedule and his work schedule. Anna would ask me to call so her and I could talk. It wasn't always Dad and her talking. So when situations happen like that, I would get to call her and talk to her.
What do you talk to her about?
Her day, my day. She would ask about our family, my kids, my grandkids, and because she got to meet them before, and we would just talk about what she was going to do when she was able to put this all behind her. She'd tell me about the what she wanted to do in life. She wants to finish her schooling. She wants to become a counselor.
You have described, Michelle, in material submitted to the Honorable Court as important influence in Anna's current life. With that power of being an important influence in her life, what role do you plan to have with reference to ensuring that she receives the counseling she needs going forward?
I plan on doing my research on what we can and how soon we can achieve it. I want to make sure that she's getting it while she's finishing her time, and make sure that she continues that afterwards.
On that issue, lastly, when that day comes and Anna is released from custody, have you and Daryl discussed the supportive role that you will have in her life going forward?
Yes, we have.
And what does that consist of?
We want to make sure that she feels positive in her independence and that she can do it. She's always, since I've known her, been low self-esteem. And we have tried to do our part in building that self-esteem. And I think that's very important for her to move on. That she doesn't have to rely on other people. She can do it. And she proved that by graduating and getting her high school diploma while she was in Mary Davis. We both attended her graduation, and so did her grandfather and her sister and her new niece. We want her to know she's got a support system.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, you knew Anna for 8 months prior to the murder?
I met her when shortly after turning 14.
Okay. Okay. So during that time that you knew her before this, before July, I think 8th, is that when you guys went and picked her up?
Yes.
Yeah. Had you ever seen any erratic behavior from her?
No. She was very quiet. She was just constantly in a state of calmness. She liked hanging out in her room. I was always the one that would go back there and say, come on, watch a movie with us. And she would.
Okay, but nothing, you didn't see anything in her behavior that gave you any pause for concern at all?
No.
And you'd spent significant periods of time with her?
Oh, yeah.
So how often was Anna with her dad and you at the house in Walnut?
I believe we got to see her every other weekend, but sometimes there was more. When she would come, if I had to work, there was one day she actually came to work with me. I went home for dinner, and she came with me back to the school for a couple hours that I had to finish my shift. And she loved hanging out in the teachers' rooms that had guinea pigs or rabbits.
Okay. But nothing out of the ordinary, just normal teenage stuff?
Yes. Play on her phone, watch TV, have friends over.
Okay. No. You, have seen her lose her temper though, haven't you?
We took her out for dinner on her birthday party, or on her birthday, I'm sorry, and we weren't sure why she wasn't wanting to really be a part of it, participating, and Rachel was there. It seemed like there was confrontation, but we couldn't tell what. Anna got up to go to the bathroom, and Rachel proceeded to tell us that her other friend was upset that she wasn't there and Rachel was.
Okay. So that was actually on her birthday, or was that on a different day that you were celebrating it?
I'm thinking it was on her birthday. We were on a time frame because Mom wanted to do something with her also.
Okay. And then, did it just seem like a normal teenage blow up, or was it something different when she got mad about it?
I'm not one to let things go, so I wanted to discuss it with her. So it was more of me bringing the discussion out because she was quiet. She didn't seem to like confrontation. But
Did she
we
finally-
talked it out, and we hugged and sat and watched a movie afterwards. Said
finally-
our I love yous.
Did she finally tell you what the issue was?
Yes.
And what was that?
A friend was upset that she did not get to, that she was not invited, and that Rachel was.
Okay.
Typical teenage drama.
I don't have any other questions, thank you.
Mr. Murdis.
I have no questions based on that.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You may step down. Please replace your mask. You may call your next witness.
And the defense has no further evidence at the time convenient and appropriate to the court.
I
of the
can't
defendant.
understand him, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't either, so you're not alone, Candy.
At a time convenient to the court, the defense would like to make, the defendant would like to make a statement in allocution.
Okay, first thing we're going to do before that is I'll turn to Mr. Costello. Do you have any victim statements that anybody would like to make at this time?
I would have one moment, please.
Okay.
We do, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first victim representative.
Well, Charlene Wilkinson, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Wilkinson, you're not under oath. Come on up, please. You are not under oath. However, I would like you to sit at the witness stand to make your statement so the reporter can take it down and we can all hear you.
Okay.
So please have a seat up here. Watch your step. Once you're situated, if you would like to remove your mask, you may. And then please be sure to face the reporter when you're talking so that she can understand what you're saying.
Okay.
And whenever you're ready, you may proceed. And I know that when people read things, they tend to speak faster. So understand that she's taking down everything that's said, so please don't get ahead of yourself. Please try to read it slowly, okay?
Okay.
All right, you
I'll
may
try
begin.
to read it. Thank you. Well, first off, Peggy was the most loving, caring person that I knew. She was so happy and felt complete when she adopted you and Kay. Peggy adored you and loved you with her whole heart. When I tutored you for 9 months, she would drop you off on Sunday evenings, and I would see the sadness in the both of you. However, on Fridays, when she picked you up, all smiles, you were always so excited to see her that you would run up to her and lay your head on her shoulders while her and I talked. Peggy worked so much to make sure that you had everything that you needed and take you on the little trips that you'd like to make with your friends. This horrific act has affected hundreds of people. Her Wall family, who I speak to frequently, and there are still so many tears. St. Jude's, that she contributed to faithfully to help others in need. She was also a donor. So if anything happened to her, she could still help others live. She was always thinking of others. I'm so confused. You were not medicated the entire time you stayed with me when I tutored you, up until the last 4 weeks or so, when you lost all focus. Peggy said she was going to take you to the doctor. When you came back on Sunday, Peggy gave me your medication, which I gave you 1 tablet before bed every night. It really made a big difference. You were able to focus, continue passing all your tests, and finish on all your assignments by May 19th, your last day of school. Peggy and I talked about you getting your permit, and she was even talking about what kind of car she wanted to buy you to make sure that you were safe. However, 6 weeks later, my sister was dead. After I got that call that her house was on fire, then there was a body in the house. When I got to Merson, people were filling me in on bits and pieces of what they knew. I knew Peggy and her habits and routines very well. By the time I finally got you to show up, I already knew it was you. However, remember when I saw you and I went up to you and gave you a hug and you showed up? I wanted to say, what did you do, Anna? I thought I had it figured out, that you maybe lost your temper and pushed Peggy and she hit her head. Or maybe she was napping and you were cooking and left the stove on and left the house. I was thinking an accident. Your dad called that night and said he needed to talk to me and my family the next day. I told him I knew, but he wouldn't say anything. He just cried. When we all met out at the farm, and he told us what happened, that you told Peggy you had a surprise for her, covered her face with a towel, and shot her in the head. I was in disbelief. I yelled at him that he was a liar. Why would Anna ever intentionally kill Peggy? Peggy loved you so much. She gave you all her time when you needed her. Remember how she would sit up with you all night, talking to you, even though she had to work the next day. I remember her telling me how tired she was, but yet she was so happy that she could get you to understand what she was teaching you. She did not care that night that you were talking about being a lesbian. That was of no concern. But she stayed up telling you why she could not approve of Rachel any longer spending the night. She was the glue that held our family together. My entire family is now shattered. We don't even talk much anymore. Most of us suffering from anxiety and depression. It was bad enough that you took her life, but then to set her body on fire. I cannot sleep at night without the panic attacks. I have dreams of my sister, my best friend, your mother, burning in flames, and I can't get to her. I cannot speak for all of my siblings, but for me, it still seems like yesterday. I'm always sad, but I do the best I can, because I know Peggy would want me to. But I still have my emotional meltdowns, and I can't help it because something will trigger in my mind a certain flower, a certain conversation with somebody. A very large part of me is gone, and it will never come back. You and I had spent several hours one day talking about consequences. Remember the what-if scenarios I talked to you about. I found your diary in the burnt house and read what you wrote at midnight the night before you shot your mother in the head. The consequences that you get here in this courtroom is nothing compared to what you and Rachel Helms deserve for taking my sister's life. Peggy and I had talked about growing old together. If we were alone, we were going to live next door to each other and bake cookies for the neighbor kids, like the Bensons did for us when we were little. She wasn't just my sister. She was the one person that I could always talk to about anything at all. She always had a positive attitude to make me see things more clearly. This horrific act has affected so many people. And I do want you to remember that. I have a statement from my sister Brenda, who lives in Massachusetts and couldn't be here. This is from Aunt Brenda. Peggy was our baby sister with the biggest and most caring heart. She took care of Mom and Dad when we were all too busy living our lives. She took the girls into her heart and her home. She cared for them and gave them a loving home. In spite of the fact that she was deaf, she got an education and made something of her life. She's a hard worker, and the most important, she believed in God. Peggy did absolutely nothing to deserve having her life cut short. And I and Rachel are heartless and selfish and mean to even think of doing such a horrific act. My heart aches every day thinking about my baby sister who had so much life. So I have.
Thank you, ma'am. Does that conclude your victim statements?
It does, Your Honor.
All right, let's go off the record a moment. Mr. Murtis, would you like a couple minutes for your client?
I think that would probably be a good idea.
Okay. Go ahead and adjourn for a little bit, and then it's my
Okay?
Remain seated, court is back in session.
All right, now we are at that portion of the case where the defendant has a chance to make a statement in allocution, and that is an unsworn statement about anything that she would like me to know. So, Ms. Schroeder, would you like to make such a statement? If you would like to do so, you're not under oath, and so then I would ask that you come up here, watch your step on the way up, have a seat, and then you can make your statement. Mr. Murtis, I think, is going to help you up there.
Have a seat and move your microphone to your mouth, please. You can remove your mask.
Okay, now, Ms. Schroeder, I'm going to say the same thing to you as everybody else. If you're going to read a statement, please be mindful of the fact that I have a court reporter here trying to take everything down. So if you can speak at a normal cadence, not really fast, and if you can be sure to speak up so that she can hear you. And whenever you're ready, you may begin, and please speak directly into the microphone.
Okay. I want to start off by saying I'm sorry. To my family, I'm very sorry. I'm the child who shot and killed her own mom. That is how people know me. That's how people will always know me, and that's how I deserve to be known. But my mom doesn't deserve to be known as my victim. She deserved to be known as a great mom. My aunt is right. My mom was a great person. She was a friend. She was a good sister. She loved animals. She loved me. She loved my sister. She definitely deserved better. I've been in jail for 4.5 years. During my time, I have thought about all the things I have missed and all the things my mom has missed. And I've gone to counseling in the morning to think about tomorrow and when I'm making my decisions. After I've served the rest of my time, I plan to work and go to school. I want to be the person that she wanted me to be. So I'm sorry, Aunt Charlene, that you miss your little sister because of me. And I'm sorry, Kayleen, that I took your mom away from you. I took our mom away from you. And I know that your life will never be as happy or as complete without our mom. And I'm sorry to my dad and Miss Hill because I put you through so much. You know, I'm sorry to my mom. I didn't think about what I was doing. I didn't think about forever. I want to go back to when I was little. And I wish I could. I wish I could go back to when we were eating ice cream and watching movies and laughing together. I wish I could go back to when she was proud of me. And I wish I had been a better daughter, and I'm learning to be a better person. And I wish that she could be here with us right now. And I don't want to be the reason that she is gone, but I am, and I'm sorry.
Thank you. You may step down. Next, I will hear from the parties as to arguments for sentencing. Mr. Costello, you may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Peggy Schroeder, mother, sister, friend. She adopted two girls, Anna and her older sister, for several years, raising them as a single mother. She worked at Wall Clipper for a very long time, was well liked. Wall was her second family. But she wanted to be able to do more for her girls. She wanted to do more than just meet their necessities of life. She wanted to do special things, create special memories. She took on extra work cleaning to earn the money that would allow her to do those special things, like taking Anna and a friend to a hotel in Molina during the winter because they wanted to swim. She gave of herself. She also shared her money to help others. She was a regular contributor to St. Jude's. She was close with her sister Charlene. They would communicate regularly. They would even watch movies together. Even though they were in different towns, they would watch a movie and text back and forth. Texting was better than talking because Peggy was hearing disabled. Peggy had a cochlear implant to assist with her hearing. But Peggy didn't let her hearing loss define her. She worked with it. She was a mother, sister, friend. She left a void that could never be filled. On July 6, 2017, Peggy Schroeder was murdered by her own daughter, Anna. On that day, Peggy came home and was greeted by Anna. Anna told her mom, Peggy, I have a surprise for you. She had Peggy hold a towel in front of her face. She brought a gun up. She pulled the trigger. She shot her mother in the head, killing her. Peggy's body fell to the living room floor. Around 7 p.m., Anna contacted her girlfriend, Rachel, to inform her of what she had done. At first, Rachel didn't believe her. Then Anna sent proof. Rachel was on the other side of the county eating with her mother. Rachel concocted a reason for her mom to take her to Anna's house in Morrison. Anna texted Rachel urging her to come to her. Anna met Rachel outside of the house. They waited for Rachel's mother to leave. When they got in the house, Rachel saw Peggy's body on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Rachel ran into Anna's room. Anna followed and threw a gun to her. They discussed how they were going to dispose of Peggy's body. They covered Peggy's body with a sheet. Then they tried to clean the blood out of the carpet. They got tired, and they went to bed. Peggy's body was still in the house. July 7th, they got up and tried to clean the carpet again. They moved Peggy's body to her bedroom. They tried again to clean the carpet. Later, they went to a local restaurant to eat. After eating, they went to a local store and bought hydrogen peroxide and other cleaning supplies, and items they would use to run away. They went back to Anna's house to continue cleaning. Annie used dye to color her hair black. Rachel used dye to color her hair red. After dyeing their hair, they went to bed. Peggy's body was still in the house. July 8th, they woke up and decided to burn the house down to conceal the evidence. Rachel lit a sheet on fire in Anna's room. She also lit the sheet covering Peggy's body on fire. They left the house and went to a local park. They dumped Peggy's cell phone in a trash can and disposed of Peggy's handgun in the cemetery. They used Peggy's credit card at the restaurant and local store. Located on Anna's cell phone, July 6, 2017, were multiple Google searches and other internet search engine searches relating to teenager shooting his parents dead, relating to, if I shoot the floor, will it come back? How to break into a gun safe. Is it safe to shoot in closed quarters where the bullet will not bounce off the walls? I have a fear it might hit the shooter himself. Is there a chance? Does shooting a gun in a confined space without any ear protection pop your eardrums? Does a bullet shot at the head, brain, cause an immediate death? Are headshots instant kills? All before she had a surprise for her mother. The text conversations between Anna Schroeder and Rachel Helm recovered on Rachel's mother's phone back at the end of June. Anna, I actually thought about killing my mom. Anna, I could always burn my house down. These were the ideas that came from Anna. These were not ideas from Rachel. Yes, they had conversations regarding poisoning. It was not regarding a shooting. It was not regarding a point-blank shooting. This crime shocked the collective consciousness of our community. This crime doesn't happen here, but it did. There's nothing any sentence can do to bring Peggy back, to fill the void she left, to heal the many people that are still hurting. Your Honor, as you know, there are factors in aggravation that the legislature requires us to consider, or actually more requires you to consider, in imposing a sentence. And among the factors in aggravation that I believe apply, the defendant's conduct caused or threatened serious harm. Now, I'm not relating this to the actual shooting and killing of Peggy, but what occurred in the aftermath. In the aftermath, where they dumped a gun in a cemetery adjacent to a park where children's playground equipment is, where children play. They left a gun at a tombstone in a cemetery. And then they burned a house, and Anna was involved in that, in close proximity to other houses, not only endangering those houses, the occupants of those houses, but the very firefighters that had to come in and put out this fire. You heard from her own dad about the intensity of the smoke when he kicked the door in and he went in and he couldn't stay and he had to come back out. Their conduct, her conduct, in addition to the killing, after the killing, her conduct caused or threatened serious harm. Sentences necessary to deter others from committing the same offense. All sentences are necessary to do that. This is a particular one. It is very important. We need to send a message. We need to send the message. This is not excusable. This is something that needs to be addressed. Another factor in aggravation, the defendant committed the offense against a person who has a physical disability or such person's property. As we know, Peggy was deaf. Peggy had a cochlear implant. She had a physical disability. Now, we've heard from Dr. Wine about, well, maybe Zoloft had something to do with this. But then he kind of backed off a little bit and said, well, you know, the label says suicidal. There's some stuff that says homicidal, but it's not really certain. It could be an influence, but it's not certain. We heard from him that, well, Anna's no risk now. Very low risk. And he knows that because, well, no, he didn't interview her again. So he knows that from his last interview 3 years ago. Well, actually back in 2018. He knows that because he reviewed some papers and because he thinks she's old enough now that her brain would have matured without having actually talked to her. I would submit that Dr. Wine's testimony in regard to the safety of the community is not to be given a whole lot of weight, frankly. The defendant's father testified that, you know, it seemed like a normal relationship that they were having. It didn't sound like he saw anything out of the ordinary with Anna's behavior. Anna's now stepmother, normal teenage behavior, nothing out of the ordinary. We heard testimony from her aunt, Charlene, who homeschooled her. Nothing out of the ordinary. Your Honor, this is an egregious offense. There is a range of sentencing that is available on this offense. We have a mother, sister, a friend taken off this planet, taken away from her friends, taken away from her family, taken away from the very daughter who killed her. All because of Anna Schroeder. And to compound, then we burn her body after the offense, burn the body, burn the house, put other people in jeopardy. This case cries out for a 20-year sentence. That is what I'm recommending. 20 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. That will be followed by, as the legislature has now determined, a 1-year period of mandatory supervised release. As of today's date, based off of my calculations, I believe that Ms. Schroeder is entitled to 1,581 days credit for time actually served. I would be requesting assessments per Schedule 1 in the amount of $549. The mandatory fine is required by statute of a minimum fine of $75. The reason I'm making that request is because, of course, Ms. Schroeder is in custody, hasn't, based off of the PSI, hasn't had a working career to speak of. I would also, there would be a DNA swabbing that would be collected and a $250 DNA analysis fee. Your Honor, it hasn't happened very often around here, and I'm very, very happy about that. But every once in a while, a crime comes along that just shocks the conscience and demands the highest sentence. This is that crime. 20 years. It's not going to make everybody whole. It's not going to bring Peggy Schroeder back. but it's gonna send a message to Anna Schroeder. It's gonna send a message to the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murdis or Ms. Busko?
Thank you. Your Honor, just 3 days after she turned 15, a child with severe mental health challenges killed her mother. We're all familiar with that thoughtless quip, do the adult crime, you do the adult time. It has an undeniable, albeit primitive, appeal, doesn't it? Some juvenile crimes are just so horrible that they awaken our most primal instincts. We almost cannot help ourselves but to disregard what we now know about the adolescent brain. We want to suppress that wisdom and allow ourselves to be guided by more basic, visceral reactions. If the crime is horrible enough, we tell ourselves, it's okay for our condemnation to be blind to the age and the circumstances of the offender. Our own juvenile instincts control us as we demand the harshest adult consequences for the child whose conduct has so deeply offended us. But, informed by the science of adolescent brain development, guided by the considered judgment of the unique circumstances of each individual child, Illinois law now appeals to the better angels of our adult wisdom. We learned in this hearing about the contrasting stages of brain development. The contrasting stages in the adolescent brain of the development of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The brain's limbic system develops much faster than its prefrontal cortex. The limbic system promotes impulsivity. It induces high-risk activity. The prefrontal cortex, which keeps the limbic system in check, develops much later. It's not there yet. It develops in early adulthood. So by reason of age and staggered development, adolescents find themselves in the abyss of high-risk urges and impulsivity, unchecked by the prefrontal cortex, which, once developed, will better regulate their conduct. In our teenage years, the divide between the rapid development of the limbic system and the far slower development of the prefrontal cortex is filled, in part, by solid family structure, good mental health, teachers, counselors, religious leaders, or others who fill the role of the immature prefrontal cortex until the prefrontal cortex catches up. But, Your Honor, not every child has the benefit of good mental health and positive outside influence to bridge the gap. Some children are less fortunate. You are called upon today to sentence a child for the adult crime of second-degree murder. The maximum sentence that can be imposed against the most mature and mentally sound adult who commits this offense is 20 years. The government asks you to impose that same maximum sentence against a mentally unwell child. Over the past decade, there has been a sea change in the law's treatment of juvenile offenders. Now, the government may argue that you already decided the issue of juvenile transfer. You already transferred this case from juvenile to adult court. And indeed, you did. But you did not, nor could you have, declared a child to be an adult. You did not, nor could you have, determined that a 15-year-old was a 40-year-old. Anna Schroeder had just turned 15 years old when this tragedy occurred. That is an indisputable fact, and the law requires that you consider it. In 2012, in Miller v. Alabama, the United States Supreme Court reversed the state of Alabama's imposition of the maximum sentence of life without possibility of parole. Now, that sentence was imposed against a 14-year-old who had been convicted of murder. high court, our nation's high court, observed that the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against excessive sanctions, quote, flows from the basic precept of justice that punishment for crime should be graduated and proportionate to both the offender and the offense. The Miller Court observed that the concept of proportionality of punishment is central. It's a core facet of our U.S. Constitution's Eighth Amendment. Our nation's highest court held that, quote, imposition of a state's most severe penalty on juvenile offenders cannot proceed as though it is being imposed on someone who is not a child. The Supreme Court remarked that its evolving decision on our law's different treatment of child offenders, quote, rested not only on common sense or on what any parent knows, but on science and social science as well. The Supreme Court referred to studies showing that, quote, only a relatively small proportion of adolescents who engage in illegal activity develop entrenched patterns of problem behavior. Our nation's high court noted that, quote, developments in psychology and brain science continue to show fundamental differences between juvenile and adult minds. For example, the Supreme Court noted, in parts of the brain involved in behavior control. The Miller Court reasoned that these findings of transient rashness, proclivity for risk, and the inability to assess consequences both lessen a child's moral culpability and enhance the prospect that as years go by and neurological development occurs, her deficiencies will be reformed. I want to be clear on what I just said. Those are the exact words of the United States Supreme Court. They may sound familiar to this court because they also happen to be the testimony of Dr. Wan, bolstered by the well-settled law enunciated by our U.S. Supreme Court in 2012. Now, the Miller Court also remarked that the distinctive attributes of youth diminish the penological justifications for imposing the harshest sentences on juvenile offenders, even when they commit terrible crimes. The Supreme Court said, quote, because the heart of the retribution rationale relates to an offender's blameworthiness. The court said, quote, the case for retribution is not as strong with a minor as with an adult. The court also questioned the less impactful deterrent effect. Now, you heard the government argue that the imposition of the maximum sentence is necessary for deterrence, but the U.S. Supreme Court says that that deterrent effect is less impactful when it comes to children, and the court should not place as great a weight on that deterrent effect when sentencing a child as with an adult. In fact, the Supreme Court explained why it is that you shouldn't place as much emphasis on the deterrent effect as Mr. Casello asks you. The Supreme Court said, quote, nor can deterrence do the work in this context because the same characteristics that render juveniles less culpable than adults, their immaturity, recklessness, and impetuosity, make them less likely to consider potential punishment. 2 years later, in People v. Davis, the Illinois Supreme Court applied Miller in a post-conviction proceeding. That was brought on behalf of a juvenile who had been convicted of double murder as an adult and sentenced to mandatory natural life. The Davis Court discussed the law's recognition of 3 general differences between juveniles under 18 and adults. First, the Davis Court observed, quote, juveniles have a lack of maturity and an underdeveloped sense of responsibility, end quote. Second, the Davis Court observed, quote, juveniles are more vulnerable or susceptible to negative influences and outside pressures, including peer pressure. Third, the Davis Court observed, quote, the character of a juvenile is not as well formed as that of an adult. The Illinois Supreme Court concluded in Davis in 2014 that these differences render the irresponsible conduct of juveniles not as morally reprehensible as that of an adult. Just 1 year ago, in People v. Humphrey, Illinois' First District expanded the requirement of different constitutionally proportionate treatment of juvenile offenders to not just those persons under the age of 18, which is what we typically think of when we think of a child, but to those offenders up to the age of 21. At the time of this tragedy, therefore, Anna Schroeder was a full 6 years younger than the age at which the law requires that different constitutionally proportionate treatment of juveniles shall occur. Now, you heard the testimony of Dr. Wang regarding the rapid development of the limbic system and the far slower development of the prefrontal cortex in an adolescent. The transient rashness, the proclivity for risk, the inability to assess consequences of youth were all ingredients of the fuel that was accumulated at 805 West Park Street in Morrison, Illinois. The child, Anna, also suffered from severe mental health challenges that date back to her early childhood. At the age of just 22 months, the baby who was Anna was removed from her biological mother's home due to extreme neglect. By the age of just 5 years old, Anna was already receiving counseling for significant mental and emotional disturbances. As a young child, she endured the high-conflict divorce of her adopted parents. From the age of 5 to the age of 15, Anna received treatment from 18 different medical and mental health providers in 4 different health systems, prescribing 10 different disjointed psychiatric medications. She suffered from ADHD, anxiety, depression, self-mutilation, suicidality. She received psychiatric drugs that were prescribed to treat the side effects of psychiatric drugs. And in the 2 years before the tragedy that brings us to this courtroom, Anna began engaging in self-mutilation. She became withdrawn from school. She was pulled out of public school and homeschooled by her aunt. In June of 2017, she received a prescription for Zoloft at 50 milligrams. And in May of 2017, in June of 2017, just 1 month before this incident, she attempted suicide. The Zoloft was actually increased without any adequate monitoring, notwithstanding the black box warning of suicidal ideation and violence, and without any monitoring or supervision whatsoever of how she was doing on the Zoloft. The ravages of mental illness, exacerbated by disjointed mental health treatment and unmonitored, dangerous sertraline, were additional ingredients of the fuel that was accumulating on Park Street. Then came the spark. Rachel Howell was certainly not the singular reason that Peggy Schroeder was murdered. She was, however, a perfectly horrible catalyst for a perfectly horrible storm. Rachel Howell did not suddenly arrive at the Schroeder residence after the murder and then, to her utter shock and total surprise, discover the occurrence of a homicide about which she knew absolutely nothing. Rachel did not rush to tell the police of the crime at her earliest opportunity. Rachel, at that point, had become a sudden powerful force in Anna's life. And Rachel wanted Anna all to herself. As Detective Molina testified, Rachel encouraged Anna to commit this terrible crime. Which brings us to a review of the applicable statutory factors of mitigation as set forth in the law. Your Honor, the factors of mitigation of the statute, of course, was subparagraph 3, which is the defendant acted under a strong provocation. I don't think that this is necessarily applicable. That tends to apply to the conduct of the alleged victim, and there's no suggestion that Peggy provoked her homicide. I think 5 is the more appropriate factor of mitigation. Subparagraph 5 provides the defendant's criminal conduct was induced or facilitated by someone other than the defendant. It was certainly, as Detective Molina told us, encouraged by Rachel. You can see that for yourself in the text messages. You know, much ado has been made by the government about the fact that Anna is the one who made the first mention. Now, the court can review the totality of the text message communication between Anna and Rachel. Rachel was not only an active participant, but she was a strong, to use Detective Molina's term, encourager of this tragedy. In fact, I want to read some of Rachel's text. Quote, "I want to kill her, just so I have you, and we can stay at your house together after we get rid of the body. You cook her something and put poison in it. I can't stand this. She needs to die soon. But when she dies and it's over with, I can do something. Something equals Anna without getting caught. Your mom has to be dead or gone. Sadly, we can't meet up while your mom's gone." Those were the words of Rachel before this crime. Certainly, the criminal conduct was induced and facilitated by someone other than the defendant. Rachel was telling her methods she could use to kill her mom. Subparagraph 4 of the statutory factors of mitigation provides that a factor of mitigation is when there are substantial grounds tending to excuse or justify the defendant's criminal conduct, though failing to establish a defense. As the court is aware, there was an affirmative defense of intoxication arising from the prescriptive drug Zoloft, filed in this case prior to the entry of the plea. And while this mitigation factor relates to those circumstances where there's a failure to establish the actual defense, it is a factor of mitigation where that prescription and the entire totality of the circumstances that gave rise to those circumstances tends to excuse or justify the defense count. So paragraph 7 certainly applies. This defendant has no history of prior delinquency, no history of criminal activity. This defendant led a law-abiding life for the entirety of her life before the commission of the present crime. I think that's important, because we have Dr. Wine's testimony that this was a perfect storm from a constellation of factors unlikely to occur. The absence of prior criminality is consistent with that position. Subparagraph 8, the defendant's criminal conduct was the result of circumstances unlikely to occur. Please recall the testimony of Dr. Wine. Dr. Wine, who is an expert in the performance of threat assessments, not only for persons involved in crimes such as this, but for international terrorists, where the stakes are high. Stakes are high here as well. But it was the opinion of that expert that the circumstances, the unique combination of circumstances that gave rise to this terrible tragedy, is unlikely to occur. And part of that is because of the development of the brain. Now, my opponent makes much ado with the fact that, well, Dr. Wine hasn't evaluated her in the last couple of years. How would he know that her brain's developed? Well, answer, she's 19. She had just turned 15 when this offense was committed. She was in early adolescence. 4.5 years have passed. How do we know that she's older? Because she's older. Because 4.5 years passed. And the brain is developed, because that's what the brain does. The next factor, the character and attitudes of the defendant indicate that she is unlikely to commit another crime. I think the testimony you've heard supports that factor of mitigation. Both her unsworn statement, which was a demonstration of the most profound remorse, coupled with what has been observed of her by her father and her beloved stepmother, with whom she's developed such a close relationship. The last factor is number 16 that I'd ask you to consider. At the time of the offense, the defendant was suffering from a serious mental illness which, though insufficient to establish the defense of insanity, substantially affected her ability to understand the nature of her acts or to conform her conduct to the requirements of law. That factor most certainly applies. The conduct of this child after this offense clearly demonstrates her youth, her immaturity, her lack of sophistication. Recall that on the day of the offense, She and Rachel took her mom's credit card, and the next day they went to Hardee's and bought themselves milkshakes with the credit card. Their plan to escape involved dyeing her hair black and then packing a backpack with SpaghettiOs, a lighter to make campfires on their way to Chicago, knives to fend off the coyotes they might encounter on their way there. They got as far as a few blocks away when their plan to escape came to an end. And my opponent's correct. The undisputed testimony in this case is they left a gun next to a headstone in a cemetery. The government argues that that was incredibly dangerous. I can hardly dispute that fact. But it's also evidence of a lack of maturity and sophistication. Furthermore, this court has now read those communications between Rachel and Anna following the tragedy. Anna wanted to tell her dad and stepmom what had happened. Rachel insisted that she must not do so. Rachel was not shocked. She was giddy. She warned Anna that she would laugh at Peggy's dead body when she first saw it, because after all, she had taken some ibuprofen over her casual dinner on her way to the Schroeder residence. Rachel Hallam was an active participant in this murder. Rachel Hallam was a catalyst for this murder. She was actively involved in the plan. She encouraged it to happen. She laughed when it did. She lived with the body for 2 days. She dragged it. She lit candles around it. And ultimately, she was the one who lit the body and the Schroeder home on fire. But Rachel Hallam has not been charged with murder. It is not the province of this court to make charging decisions, but this court is the arbiter of the equal administration of justice. Against the factual backdrop of this case, that Anna faces a maximum sentence of 20 years while Rachel faces a maximum sentence of 7 years is hardly a demonstration of the proportionate administration of justice. In consideration of the youth, mental illness, and inducement by another in this case, we respectfully request and recommend a sentence of 12 years to the Illinois Department of Corrections, followed by a 1-year term of mandatory supervised release. We concur with the state's calculation of credit for time served. We concur with the application of the fine and fee schedule. Youth. Lifelong mismanaged mental illness. The spark that was Rachel Hallam. It was a perfectly horrible storm. It is the early evening of July 6, 2017. A child and her mother stand facing one another at the entrance of their home. The mother enters the front door. The child promises a surprise. The mother, at the child's request, holds a dish towel over her face. The child raises the gun. A constellation of problems and missed opportunities has delivered this child to this place and this time. She is the 22-month-old baby taken away from her severely mentally ill biological mother and placed into foster care. She is the child who endured the seemingly unending high-conflict divorce of her parents, for which she blamed herself. She is the child who received treatment from 18 different medical and mental health providers and 10 different disjointed psychiatric medications with no adequate monitoring. She's the child who had come to fear any measure of abandonment so greatly that she considered a threat to her relationship with Rachel to be a threat to her very existence. It is the third day 14th year on earth. And in this moment, the child has a decision to make. She does not want to pull the trigger. She does not want to shoot her mother. But she knows at this moment that if her mother pulls the dish towel away, she will see her child standing there with the gun. She knows that her mother will be angry. She fears that her mother may never speak to her again. So the child pulls the trigger. A good mother dies. Anna killed her mom because Anna was afraid that if she did not do so, her mother would never speak to her again. It's utter nonsense. It's the entirely inexplicable and absolutely incomprehensible thought process of a mentally unwell child. Convoluted thinking of a child with severe mental health challenges. Nelson Mandela said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." The case of People versus Anna Schroeder is no simple criminal case. It requires a complex and compassionate understanding of a child's mind. And in this, it reveals our very soul. Thank you.
You doing okay, Kim? Part of a court's duties include educating and informing the public and ensuring that proceedings in the courtroom are transparent. In fact, extended media has been allowed for just that purpose in this case. In understanding the mechanics of this particular case, the public should not be confused by misinformation about the legal process. So I'm going to quickly walk everyone through how we came to be at this point today. The defendant had just turned 15 years of age when this offense was committed. She was originally charged in juvenile court due to her youth, and after a hearing, I entered an order transferring the case to adult court. Thereafter, a criminal information was filed against the defendant. Before she was known as a minor, now she's in adult court, she's known as the defendant, alleging 2 counts of first-degree murder, concealment of a homicidal death, and arson. Thereafter, the defendant filed a motion to suppress statements made by the defendant to the police. I heard the motion and allowed those statements to be suppressed. There's a case known as Miranda versus Arizona, which was decided in 1966 by the United States Supreme Court. That case and the many, many cases which followed that ruling, as decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, along with our Illinois Supreme Court and our appellate courts, require that statements made in response to police questioning after a defendant says that he or she does not wish to speak must be suppressed. To do otherwise would provide a successful ground for an appeal upon a conviction. The officers in this case questioning the defendant, I believe, were well-intentioned, but they failed to follow the requirements of the Miranda decision after this defendant said she did not wish to speak further. It is incorrect to say that this case was thrown out by the court. Only the state's attorney's office can decide what cases will be prosecuted or not. Pursuant to a limited plea agreement, this defendant pled guilty to second-degree murder. The state then dismissed 2 counts of first-degree murder, an arson charge, and a charge of concealment of a homicidal death. So at this point, the defendant was no longer facing the very onerous sentence that she could have faced if those first-degree murder charges were pursued. Our legislature has determined that second-degree murder is a probationable offense. However, this court never would have imposed probation for this offense, regardless of the parties' agreement to forego probation as a possible sentence after having heard the evidence presented at this sentencing hearing. Imposing probation would have deprecated the seriousness of this offense and would be inconsistent with the ends of justice. I further find that imprisonment is necessary for the protection of the public. Further, our legislature has determined that a person convicted of second-degree murder can be sentenced to between 4 to 20 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. The legislature has mandated that after pronouncing a sentence in this matter, I must give a statement set forth in our sentencing statute that will apprise the public of the amount of time the defendant is likely to actually serve in this matter, given the statutory credits designed by our legislature as applied by the Illinois Department of Corrections and the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. So, no matter what sentence I impose here today, it will automatically be modified by the credits our legislature has seen fit to award and those credits awarded by the Department of Corrections. I next have to make the following findings which are required by statute. I have considered the pre-sentence report and the addendum thereto filed in this matter. I have considered any financial impact of incarceration if applicable. I have considered the various treatments that have been provided to the defendant. I have considered the arguments of the parties. I have considered the statement of the victim's representative. I have afforded the defendant a chance to make an unsworn statement on her own behalf, and I have considered the same. I find that a motor vehicle was not used in the commission of this offense. I also find that the defendant is ineligible for impact incarceration by nature of this offense. Next, I am required by statute to look at each and every one of the statutory factors in aggravation and mitigation before imposing a sentence. After doing so, I find the following factors apply, but I will indicate that even though I will mention specifics, I have considered each and every factor, and as I go forward with this decision, I will be making findings which may touch on some of these factors, both in mitigation and aggravation. I find the defendant has no history of prior criminal conduct. And that's something to be said for somebody who's facing the possible sentence that this defendant is facing. I am finding that this conduct is a result of circumstances unlikely to reoccur. Now, I do say this with some hesitation. Although this is the first criminal conviction for this defendant, I dare say that no one here would have predicted that she would have killed her mother. However, giving the defendant the benefit of the doubt as to this factor, I still believe that imprisonment is necessary to protect the public, as I cannot say with absolute conviction that this behavior will not be repeated in the future. However, I couch that in terms of the fact that not only have I considered the testimony of Dr. Wine on this topic, but there is nothing known to this court at this time to suggest that there may be repetition of this act. I cannot find that the defendant acted under provocation. Admittedly, Rachel Helm engaged in encouraging comments to the defendant about killing Peggy Schroeder, but I cannot find that they rose to the level of provocation, and I believe Mr. Murtis is correct that provocation really needs to come from the victim as opposed to any outside source. I'm going to next talk about the factors in aggravation. I find that This sentence that I'm going to impose is necessary to deter others from committing this offense. We cannot have people who are upset with a loved one terminating their lives at will. I also find that this was committed against a person with a disability because, as we all know, the defendant's mother was hearing impaired. Again, I have considered each and every one of the factors in mitigation and aggravation before imposing this sentence. I have considered the following facts that were presented during this sentencing hearing, and again, some of the factual findings will also reflect upon factors in aggravation and mitigation that I have considered. I am emphasizing again, although I have singled out certain factors, I have considered each and every factor in aggravation and mitigation before imposing this sentence. Facts that I find that have arisen from this sentencing hearing are as follows. The defendant was a very young child when she and her sister were adopted by the victim and her then husband, Daryl Schroeder. At the time of this offense on July 6, 2017, the defendant had just turned 15 years old. Prior to that date, the defendant had been involved in mental health treatment for almost a decade. I do find, however, that despite seeing mental health professionals on a fairly regular basis, she never sought the assistance of any of these providers in the months leading up to this incident for any thoughts regarding killing her mother. I do take into account the fact that there did not seem to be an organized plan for this minor's treatment. There did not seem to be a coordination of treatment and medications. I cannot find that in fact gave way to this particular offense being committed. Peggy Schroeder and the defendant's adoptive father divorced a few years ago, and Peggy became a single mom who worked a job at Wall Clipper full-time, and she also worked side jobs doing cleaning in order to support the defendant and her sister. She tried to have extra money available in order to spend it on the defendant and her sister for special activities. Prior to killing Peggy Schroeder, the defendant and her then girlfriend, Rachel Helm, had text message contact about the defendant killing her mother. The girls had a sexual relationship and talked about killing Peggy as a way to continue with that relationship. Now, even though I heard testimony about Peggy and her father and stepmother not necessarily being in favor of this relationship, what they did was they treated it as a traditional boyfriend-girlfriend situation that parents worry about with teenagers, and they impose certain rules. And those rules, from what I've heard, seem to be extremely reasonable and not overly overbearing upon the defendant and her girlfriend. Although I do find that Rachel was supportive and encouraging of the killing of Peggy Schroeder, it was the defendant who first mentioned killing Peggy and using a gun. Now, I can't look at that just in a vacuum because I do note that Rachel gave her other methods of committing this offense, and she was very vociferous about her support to the defendant in her quest to kill her mother. However, I do note that when this murder occurred, Rachel was nowhere near the Schroeder home, and she was disbelieving when she was first told of the murder by the defendant. I note that the defendant prepared for killing her mother. She had to obtain a gun, and she took her mother's gun. She conducted various internet searches on how to kill someone, including children killing parents, shooting a person in the head, and the like. On July 6th of 2017, the defendant, who was home alone, laid in wait for her mother to arrive home, had a towel ready, and told her mother to put the towel over her head as she had a surprise for her. She then fired Peggy's own handgun at Peggy's head, killing her, Afterward, the defendant texted Rachel about doing so, and she even sent a photo of her deceased mother to Rachel. This, in my opinion, was a planned, premeditated act. Rachel was dropped off at the defendant's residence by Rachel's mother. At that point, the defendant could have told Rachel's mother what she had done and sought help. She chose not to do so. Now, admittedly, there may have been some subliminal pressure from Rachel not to do that. And I do note that there was text messaging from Rachel begging the defendant not to tell anyone, including the defendant's father and stepmother. However, nothing prevented the defendant from doing so. The defendant and Rachel next tried to clean up the blood in the living room around Peggy's body to conceal the murder. They placed a sheet over the body and slept that night in the same home with Peggy Schroeder's dead body. It wasn't until the next day that Rachel and the defendant dragged Peggy's lifeless body into her bedroom. Again, they spent the night with the defendant's mother's body in the home. Candles were placed around Peggy's body to disguise the smell of the body. And I acknowledge that Rachel actually did this, but there was nothing from the defendant indicating that was in poor taste, she didn't want her to do it, anything of that nature. That day, the defendant and Rachel used Peggy's debit card to buy themselves some food and supplies in order to run away. They also bought hair coloring and dyed their hair. Now, it is correct that this was a really minimal, sophomoric attempt at trying to run away from what has occurred. And quite frankly, I don't think anybody in here would have followed such a plan in the defendant's shoes. And I think everybody can tell that the defendant's plan to run away and hide things was very ill thought out and in fact never really came to fruition. During their text communications prior to the killing, the defendant suggested that her house could be burned down to hide the killing. Ultimately, Rachel was the person who lit the sheet over Peggy's body on fire and used other pieces of cloth to start a fire in the home. There is no indication that the defendant discouraged this burning of either the body or the home. The fire was discovered by a neighbor, was reported to Mr. Schroeder, and he's actually the person who called it in. Luckily, no other persons or property were damaged by the fire. However, Peggy's deceased body was certainly defiled by the burning of it. The defendant and Rachel then discarded Peggy's phone and a gun at both a park and a local cemetery. It is unknown if the gun was loaded. I can only imagine the tragedy that might have unfolded if that gun was loaded and found by a child. The police were alerted to what had occurred by Rachel, who met with police and told them of her involvement and that of the defendant. Meanwhile, prior to that, the defendant was at her father's home. She was with her father and her stepmother, with whom she had a very close and loving relationship. At no time did she tell them what had occurred. She even had a friend over, and apparently they did typical teenage behaviors, and it wasn't until the police arrived at the Schroeder's doorstep that the pieces began to fall into place. I do acknowledge that the defendant and her father cooperated with the police, and she was taken to the police department to tell what had occurred. I understand that the defendant was angry and upset with her mother over her belief, whether it was verifiable or not, that her mother disapproved of the relationship with Rachel Helm. I can sympathize with this frustration, as I believe every teenage girl has at one time or another been at odds with the parent. Teens do not always think rationally, and drama seems to accompany most teenage behaviors. I recognize, as Dr. Wine indicated, that a youth's brain is not as well developed as an adult brain. It behaves differently than an adult's, and impulsive actions are quite common with teenage kids. I also understand that peer pressure, not to mention encouragement to engage in inappropriate acts from a person you have feelings for, would be very difficult to resist. I have taken into account that the minor comes from a difficult background. She is an adopted child, although she was lucky enough to find Peggy and Daryl Schroeder, who wanted to welcome her and her sister into their lives. The defendant suffered from mental health issues from an early age, but it appeared that her parents were on top of at least securing treatment for her and doing everything they could to address these issues, whether it be through counseling, medication, or different approaches to school. I understand that the care that they sought and which was provided to the defendant was not within acceptable parameters, and that the medications were not coordinated, nor was care. There is nothing before the court to indicate that if proper measures had been taken, or if life had taken a different path for the defendant, she never would have committed this act. Just because circumstances may have facilitated the propensity to commit this act, it doesn't mean that this defendant was incapable of resisting the urge to act. I am sure it was very painful for the defendant when her parents divorced, and she had to adjust to being raised in a single-parent household. However, it appears that her father was very supportive and made the most of his parenting time with the defendant. When her father brought his now wife, Michelle, into their lives, she developed a very close and loving relationship with the defendant, giving her yet another adult to whom the defendant could turn for support. All of that being said, this case is probably in the top tier of the most egregious and despicable fact situations I can recall in my almost 37 years in the law. The callous disregard for the life of Peggy Schroeder, the adoptive mother of the defendant, is disgusting. People may rationalize that this behavior is instigated by Rachel Helm or brought about by the defendant's youth or her faulty thought processes, medication interactions, or influence in her life cause this behavior. I do acknowledge that Rachel Helm very much encouraged this act and then actively assisted the defendant with her post-murder actions. What it boils down to is this: there is no evidence that Anna Schroeder did not know the difference between right and wrong. No one forced her to commit this act. She thought of a plan to kill her mother and burn down her house to cover it up, and she took the steps to put her plan into action. She chose to act in this evil manner and then tried to get away with it. It was not an impulsive crime with no forethought or planning. In doing so, she placed herself and others at risk, not to mention ending the life of a hardworking woman who welcomed the defendant into her life, doing the best she could as a parent with a disability and later as a single mother. As a result, I am sentencing the defendant to 20 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, followed by a 1-year period of mandatory supervised release with credit for 1,581 days served. The defendant shall pay all assessments set forth under Schedule 1. She will pay a $75 fine. She will submit to genetic marker analysis testing and pay the fee therefor. As I indicated, the legislature has seen fit to allow my sentence to be modified. I have no control over these modifications allowed by statute. This includes, on top of the statutory credits I will discuss in a moment, application of day-for-day credit, allowing for the sentence to be reduced by half. As a result, the legislature requires that I make the following statement to explain those modifications designed by statute. The purpose of this statement is to inform the public of the actual period of time this defendant is likely to spend in prison as a result of this sentence. The actual period of prison time is determined by the statutes of Illinois as applied to this sentence by the Illinois Department of Corrections and the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. In this case, assuming the defendant receives all of her sentence credit and recognizing that the defendant has spent over 4 years in pre-sentence custody, the estimated period of actual custody, and again, this is an estimate, is approximately 16 years with day-for-day credit, in essence rendering it a 50% sentence, less up to 180 days of additional earned sentence credit. If the defendant, because of her own misconduct or failure to comply with institutional regulations, does not receive those credits, the actual time served in prison will be longer. The defendant may also receive an additional 1/2 day sentence credit for each day of participation in vocational, industry, substance abuse, and educational programs as provided for by Illinois statute. Despite the fact that the defendant has waived her right of appeal, I'm still going to advise her of her appeal rights. Prior to taking an appeal, you must file with the circuit clerk within 30 days of today's date a written motion asking to have the sentence vacated and for leave to withdraw your plea of guilty, setting forth the grounds for your motion. Any issue or claim of error not raised in your motion will be deemed waived. If your motion is allowed, your plea of guilty and sentence will be vacated and a trial date will be set on the charge to which the plea of guilty was made. Upon request of the state, anything that was dismissed as part of your plea agreement will be reinstated and set for trial. If your motion is denied, you will have 30 days after that date in which to file a written notice of appeal with the circuit clerk if you are indigent, and if in order to prepare and file your motion or your notice of appeal, you can be furnished with a free transcript of these proceedings. In addition, an attorney can be appointed to assist you in the preparation of those documents. Do you understand those rights, Ms. Schroeder?
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions about those rights?
No.
Anything further from the parties other than a sentencing order?
I think we need a pay or appear date.
Do you want to suggest one?
I'll let counsel suggest one.
Okay, hang on a minute and I'll come up with one. How about January 9th of 2030?
May I approach you?
You may. Mr. Murtis and Ms. Buskol, have you seen the proposed order?
I have seen the order, Your Honor. The order is appropriate in form. And the judgment of conviction, there is a spot for the court to indicate 50%, 75%, 85%. Mr. Casella indicates that he does not fill that in. Given what the court's indicated, I don't know if the court will do so or not.
I'm not filling it in. I'll let the department decide that.
Then the defense has no objection to the form of the order.
Did we fill in the days for which she has credit?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I see it. Thank you. Ms. Schroeder, you are remanded to the custody of the Whiteside County Sheriff to be transported to the Illinois Department of Corrections. Good luck to you.
Thank you.